save the kingdom, press subscribe to Geek Legion of Doom.
"1983 saw the release of Fire and Ice, directed and co-written by Ralph Bakshi, obviously known for movies like the animated version of Lord of the Rings and Wizards, to name but a few. And he co-produced this with Frank Frazetta, a famed artist known for his work in the fantasy world. And Frazetta was kind of the inspiration, effectively, for this movie. So Bakshi and Roy Thomas wrote this movie and produced it. So the story is one set in this kind of fantasy world, basically, and we have our good guys, who are the kind of the fire in the title, and we have this kind of kingdom ruled by a king who kind of rules in this kind of volcanic area, and the bad guys are this kind of mother and son duo, the son being called Necron, and he has these kind of magical powers that is able to move these kind of glaciers at kind of very fast speed and basically kind of take over the kind of all the areas, and he has kind of an army of like Neanderthals. And our bad guys effectively kidnapped the king's daughter, the princess, and it's up to a warrior from one of the outer kingdoms to try and rescue her, and he gets aid from a mysterious stranger in the form of Darkwolf, a kind of mysterious outsider who has his own reasons for going after Necron. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So, let's discuss what works in this movie's favour. Now, this is, I say, a 1983 movie, and it used a technique called rotoscoping, which is a technique where they filmed live action sequences and then basically traced over them to get a kind of fluid and realistic movement. So the animation in this, and if you've seen movies like the Lord of the Rings animated movie, for example, you've probably seen it before, but it gives a kind of fluid and realistic motion to a lot of the work here. So it's a really fantastic piece of animation, and obviously the art style being inspired by Frank Frazetta, and Frank Frazetta actually has some artwork that kind of crops up in the actual movie in regards to like the title sequences and things like that. So it's this kind of very like sort of barbarian-esque Conan, sort of almost He-Man sort of style world with heroic good guys, dastardly bad guys, voluptuous princesses, and all the rest of it. So, I mean, the animation is incredible, and this movie, I think, looks fantastic. It wasn't like a mega high budget movie, but it really does, I think, stand the test of time in regards to 2D hand-drawn animation. And obviously, because it used this rotoscoping technique, it looks sort of somewhat realistic in regards to its animated style, which kind of gives it more of maybe a depth and sort of an adultness than maybe a movie that doesn't kind of use this technique, because it kind of feels a little bit more grounded in regards to how our characters are kind of like moving around and their proportions and things like this. And obviously the art style as well, but it's very high fantasy. We have our heroes pretty much just wearing loincloths, our princess just wearing like not a lot really. So it's obviously going into that very much that heroic kind of fantasy stereotype and kind of high fantasy ideals that you'll have certainly in the 80s when this was kind of obviously coming out of the stuff. So if you've ever seen the movie, the magazine called Heavy Metal, Frazetta did a lot of work for that, and it's very much borrowing from that kind of style of artwork. So it looks fantastic. And if you just want a kind of a simple story, good versus evil, this movie kind of delivers on that. And the movie in some ways to me feels a little bit like Star Wars. I mean, one way to say that, we have our main hero, this kind of blonde sort of somewhat kind of newbie warrior teaming up with a grizzled, slightly older warrior who is a bit more of a kind of a scoundrel, so to speak, to rescue the princess. And the final assault is this kind of they use these things called dragon hawks, which are kind of like these pterodactyl things that they're flying through the enemy base, a little bit like the kind of the assault on the Death Star. So it has this kind of Star Wars vibe to it. I can't help I feel the story was really sort of a riff on the kind of the original Star Wars movie and just transposing it into a kind of a fantasy setting. But you know, Star Wars was a popular movie for a reason, so it's very much kind of following that hero's journey sort of template and stuff like this. Now, it's kind of it's actually rated a PG movie, I believe, but it's somewhat strong for a PG. I mean, it's not overly explicit, but the levels of, I think, you know, we get people being executed and things like that, and although it's not graphically gory or anything like that, it's a stronger film, I think, than you might necessarily expect. I mean, it's certainly has levels of violence here that you might be thinking might actually end up being in a stronger movie, a higher rated movie in regards to age rating. So the look of the movie is great. It's got a great kind of soundtrack, and you know, as I say, villains that you can kind of like boo, hiss at, and heroes you can root for. But what did this movie lack? Unfortunately, the movie really lacks in story. It is a very, very basic, simple story. Good versus evil. Necron, our bad guy, wants to kind of, you know, take over the world. Why? Because he's evil, and he just wants to do it. What's our kind of main hero like? Don't really know, don't get any characterization. He's just a good guy. What's Dark Wolf's motivations? Don't know. He's just a good guy, but a little bit more kind of, you know, rugged, I suppose. So there's a real lack of characterization in this movie as well. I mean, to give you one specific example, just to kind of like highlight it. So the kingdom of our sort of good guys, we have a king whose daughter is kidnapped, the princess, and he's, you know, he's distraught, trying to kind of like obviously get his daughter rescued. So he sends his son, and we're presuming there's only two children because we only ever see the son and the daughter, to try and negotiate with Necron, the bad guy. And the son is killed, and when he finds out about this, he just kind of shrugs. There's like no moment where the kind of the father, you know, is really like regretful of sending his son ultimately to die and stuff like that. He just almost goes, and then sort of moves on. So it's really sort of, I have to say, lacking in characterization. I mean, our princess, I mean, the actually going back to the story itself, our princess is just a string of, she gets captured, she escapes, she gets captured again, she escapes, she gets captured again. And even with the story that we do have, there's a lot of meandering around. There's a lot of kind of just like scenes where we're just kind of like milling around, or even sometimes completely pointless scenes. For example, we have a sequence where at one point where our princess escapes, she's captured by this kind of like giant ogre looking dude and then taken to a witch. Where you're thinking, okay, so what's the story going to do here? Absolutely nothing, because the subhumans, these kind of Neanderthals, just capture her again and then just carry on. So it was a completely pointless sort of distraction, really, and it didn't add anything to the movie. Why even have that sequence? So it really doesn't have a lot of point, some of these kind of sequences, and you just feel it's just, you know, it's great to look at, the animation and the art style is great, but story-wise and characterization-wise, this movie really is lacking. So it's a very basic film. You certainly can't accuse this one of being a deep story or having deep and interesting characters, because there isn't. Tell me one thing interesting about our main hero. Tell me one thing about his character outside of he's heroic. No, I challenge you. So, how to rate this movie? Now, the story isn't sort of the story's not necessarily bad. It's just very simplistic. The characterization, I would say, is bad. But the technical elements here, the look of the movie, the aesthetics, the animation, the art style, are all very, very good. Particularly the time we're talking about here. So I will say this is an above average movie, purely on the technical elements, but on the story side it's really lacking. So I'm going to give this movie a 6 out of 10 overall, because it's certainly worth watching if you're a fantasy fan, but it's like a story that I think is fundamentally flawed. Have you seen it? What are your thoughts? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.
Remember, kids, always give Geek Legion of Doom a big thumbs up.